How's it if you unmute your mic? You see, you take a week off, you forget how all this stuff works. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ken.
Welcome, everyone. We have David and we have Dr. Ricks as always, and welcome to episode 240 of Line Upon Line. This week, we're going to talk about the divided kingdom and the false worship of God. So, Dr. Ricks, if you would start us out.
Glad to do so. An older lady offers the bus driver some peanuts, nice and, juicy, and he eats them. Every 5 minutes, she gives him another handful of peanuts. She's sitting behind the driver. And at some point, the driver says, well, why don't you eat the peanuts yourself? The old lady said, well, I would, but I can't chew. Look, I have no teeth. Then why do you buy them? Because I love the chocolate around them.
That was horrible.
It takes a while for the impact. You want another horrible joke? This guy goes up in the mountains, deep in the hills, and he's eating some food, and it's kind of gritty on the plates. He says to the lady, are these plates clean? He says, yes. She says, they're as clean as soap and water can get them. Let me show you. She takes the plates. They still got a little bit of food on them. He slants them on a step on the front porch, and then she calls, here soap, here water, and two big dogs with big tongues come and clean the plates.
It's just like bad to worse.
It's good as soap and water can get them, right? Okay, now that we're in really interesting jokes, this one's called The Lion Tamer. The man told the ringmaster he was interested in joining the circus and he wanted to be a lion tamer. Ringmaster asked, well, what experience have you had? He said, I'm the son of one of the most famous lion tamers in history. My father tamed a lot of lions, and I learned everything I knew from him. He says, well, can you get a lion to jump through a fiery ring? Yes, I've done it many times. Can you get 6 lions to make a little lion pyramids? Yes, I've done it many times. He says, have you ever had your head in a lion's mouth? He said, only once. He said, why only once? He said, well, I was looking to see where my father went.
No.
Now, this one is a visual joke. Visual. You probably can't see that too well, but it's a bunch of a doctor and all of his associates. They're looking at a patient in bed, and they say, this is a 38-year-old male, still living with his parents, and they want us to keep him for observations overnight so they can change the locks.
I'm gonna have to try that. Things keep going the way they are.
Yeah, been there. Been there.
Okay. Today we're going to talk about a topic, the divided kingdom. But I believe that you have to understand the divided kingdom to really understand much of the Bible. But also I believe that as a nation becomes less godly, it becomes more divided and violent. I'm not saying that's the only reason America is becoming more divided and violent, but I believe because we're less godly, God is pulling back whatever it is he blesses a country with, and that's why things are going worse and worse in the violence division factor. And America is very divided. Originally Israel was unified with just one religion. And because Solomon was not loyal to God in the end of his life, he allowed his, put up the first slide, Ken, and we'll talk about Solomon just for a brief second here.
All right, 1 Kings 11:15. And Solomon goeth after Ashtaroth, goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon doeth the evil thing in the eyes of Jehovah, and hath not been fully after Jehovah, like David his father.
Yeah. He was, well, he was not loyal to God. His infidelity to God, because of that, God allowed the nation to divide, and he told Jeroboam, you're going to have 10 tribes. But Jeroboam didn't really trust God, and he altered the religion, and they got less godly. And I believe the less godly, the northern 10 tribes, there's northern 10, and just so you know the numbers, in case, if you haven't gone through it, there are 12 tribes, but Joseph's tribe was split into two, so we end up with 13 tribes. Basically, 3 tribes became part of Judah, the kingdom of Judah in the south, and 10 became part of what's often called Israel, or the northern 10. And as the northern 10 pulled further away from God, they got more violence and bad things happened to them. So let's look at the next slide, and we'll start looking at how things start to go down a little bit.
First Kings 11:31, and saith to Jeroboam, take to thee 10 pieces, for thus said Jehovah, God of Israel, lo, I am rending the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and have given to thee the 10 tribes. And the 1 tribe he hath for my servant David's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, the city which I have fixed on out of all the tribes of Israel.
So now you got 2 nations, the northern 10 and Judah, which ended up being the southern 3, because we'll look at that a little bit later, but you have the southern 3. The key part of all this is the northern 10 took a bad turn when Jeroboam said to himself, every year all the people, or a fair number of them, went south to the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, where the temple is. And he says, if they do that every year, they're going to want to go back to the king of Judah, and they'll want to kill me. They'll want to reunite because we have the same religion, and it's centered, in the south where the king of Judah is. So apparently he got advisors, and they told him a good Machiavellian thing would be, we will create 2 holy sites. They're not holy, but we'll call them holy. One the north, one the south. And it's before, if you're on the road to Jerusalem, it's before you got to Jerusalem. So you could conveniently stop there. And he put a golden young bull or golden calf in both places and changed the worship. Let's read the 3rd slide.
All right, 1 Kings 12:28. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, and he put the other he put in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. And he made an house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi.
Oh, by the way, the lower 3 ended up with the tribe of Dan, Levi, because most of the Levites said, well, if they're going to change the religion, we might as well just go down to be with Judah. That point about the lowest of the people, different translations may translate it differently. I think the real essence of that was that the Levites knew the scriptures. That's what they were taught. They studied it. These people that he made priest, not only did they not know the scriptures that well, but being lowest of the people, they do anything for money. He could create his own religion. They'd preach, you pay me, I'll preach what you put up there.
You're saying there were lawyers.
They were politicians or
politicians,
whatever.
Yeah. Well, lawyers tend to become politicians.
And You know, we might chuckle at that, but you realize that is a real problem.
Yeah.
Even when worldwide was collapsing, there were men who said things like, "Well, yeah," and I am sympathetic to them. So I'm not saying I don't understand the pressure they were under. Well, you know, they told me to preach some of this new stuff, and they're paying my salary. What can I do?
Quit.
I had one told me, he said, you know, I had to lie to you because they were going to keep my severance pay. And I said, you know, God had a donkey talk one time. The donkey did a better job than you because he didn't lie. And I said, you know, they can rise up stones to do your job. And I said, you know, I lose everything before I stand there at the lectern and lie to the entire congregation of people. And he goes, well, I'm not working at McDonald's. And I won't tell you who he is, but he's still preaching.
Well, all I can tell you, money is a powerful thing. And I think that's why he picked the people he picked, because Jeroboam, in effect, made up his own religion. And they would preach anything he want. For instance, you all probably know this because you're very aware of the scriptures, but let's go to the next slide. We can just discuss what he did that I think really messed up the northern 10 tribes of Israel.
All right. 2 Kings 10:6. And then he wrote a letter to the second letter.
Have we jumped past do you have 1 Kings 12:33?
Oh, then I think I did jump past that.
Yes.
All right, let's try this one. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he offered upon the altar and burnt incense, offered or went up to the altar, etc., and burnt herb or burnt incense, or not herb, Hebrew.
Now, when most people read that, they think, well, what's the big deal? What did he do? He just simply moved the feast back 1 month, and he put idols in the altar and false priests who preach anything he tells them. I don't think we have all the details, but what it boils down to is God does not allow you to change his holy days.
Nope. Just like Easter, Christmas.
And the Jewish people have done away with the Passover night and moved it to the night to be observed, and they do it all on that. It's easier. It's all in one lump sum now. You don't have this day, skip a day, and it starts over. They just do it all in one. They actually were doing that back in Christ's time. I think the Galileans had started doing that.
Well, one thing is for sure, his change is well documented, that he moved it 1 month. They think Oktoberfest is maybe a remnant of that. Whether it is or isn't is not important. But he changed the religion, and they went to idols. By the way, you know, the golden calf is what the Israelites went to. You'll see it in Exodus 32:4. As soon as Moses went up the mountain, it didn't come back fast enough. So the Israelites had the tendency to want to go to the golden calf. And God did not like that. But they wanted it. So Jeroboam gave them what they wanted: a convenient religion, less travel. It's easy. It's what the world has. I mean, the world had golden calves, and probably a priesthood that started, you know, things on the high sites. They started doing what the pagans did.
Well, the children of Egypt didn't know anything else either. They had been captive 430 years, so they're going to revert back to what they've been taught. You know, not defending them by any means. You would think after they'd seen what they had seen and watched the fall of the greatest nation and the fall of the greatest military by a single man, basically, and his God, that they wouldn't have done that. But at the same time, they were pretty indoctrinated in the Egyptian way of life.
Yeah, and it was a real problem for them. And here's what happened. anytime you start, I think it's like a slippery slope. The moment you start, and I'm not saying misunderstandings or some technical debate, it was deliberate to prevent them from going to Jerusalem. Once you start messing with God's religion and changing things, you will end up into something that will offend God. You know, the whole point of religion is to get God's blessing and to get closer to God. This offended God, drove God further away. And as God went further away from the northern 10, they had more disunity and more violence. And it just was, it became an ugly scene. And of course, the analogy is, and God even had a prophet sent there, uh, and you know, and the whole thing, the very altar collapsed, the ashes. He told him how much God despised it. And even when that prophet was supposed to not even stay there and eat, to show you how much God didn't like it, when he violated those rules and bad things happened to him, and they told Jeroboam about it, he still didn't repent. It's one of the more shocking things. He was bent on keeping his people out of the temple in Jerusalem. There's a principle behind this too. I call it quality control in religion. I've heard people say, "Well, it's a longer drive to go to your church where, you know, certain people are there who we can at least reasonably guarantee know what they're talking about. I can meet with so and so in my home." Yes, but who knows what they're going to teach you and the quality of what you're getting. I think it's the same principle. If the people should have gone all the way to Jerusalem, stay close to God, but they didn't, and they turned bad. What are your thoughts, Ken?
Well, what I observe now is there's people that follow individuals in different churches, I mean, even Sabbath keeping churches, and instead of in an organization, like there's a lot of independent groups out there that are single people and single individuals that it's easy to get lost and not, and who, I guess my point is, who checks the people at, if there's only one person in running that organization, who checks them? I'd rather have be in a church where there's many different checks and balances to keep people from drifting off into their own ideas.
I'll tell you one story that you might find interesting. One of our ministers preached some doctrines, came out of his head that was a little over the top. Well, of course, there were complaints, but the area coordinators and certain key ministers got together, and we basically wrote him some letters and told him you have to desist from that end. In other words, if somebody in our church wants to change major doctrines, they have to worry about what will the church as a whole say. And it's a little harder to do. One man running his one little group in his house, he gets an idea. And what I found is once a lot of people leave because they want their own group. I want to be the head Indian. Okay, I understand that thinking. But for those of you that drift off of people like that, they usually eventually want to find their doctrinal baby that makes them special. And before you know it, they do what Jeroboam did. They step off the doctrinal gangplank and they go down quick. I mean, I know specific examples of a number of people that have done that. So I encourage people to go to official feast sites, go to official churches as much as you're able to. Stay with us. It's safer spiritually. By the way, one of the problems that we see when you look at Jeroboam was because they changed the religion, the pathway back to repentance was kind of blocked because you're no longer in the religion of God. And if you compare Judah with the northern 10, or you call the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, the northern 10 never had a revival. They never had repentance, went back to God. They never had a good king. It was bad king, worse than ever, worse than ever. And it went down, 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 where Judah, and they had many bloody revolutions, where Judah stuck with one lineage, that of David, the whole time. And they lasted a number of centuries longer, and they had a lot more peace because they had some revivals and more or less stayed with God's truth. I'm not saying everything went perfect. That's another and then when they came back from captivity, you got the scribes and the Pharisees, but still, doctrinally, they were reasonably good. I'll put it that way. Where the Northern 10 it was definite trouble. One thing I want to mention, have any of you ever thought of this? I saw recently some tragedy they were talking about, and I forgot what tragedy it was, but all the government officials and others said, let's have a moment of silence. Insult to God, that is. Why don't you simply say, let's have a prayer. Now, if they want everybody to pray silently to themselves, to whatever God they want, I could see that. Or you can have someone lead the prayer, and you can say, each of you can adjust the end of the prayer to what you want it to be. But the idea that we can no longer pray in the public square, isn't that a slap in the face of God?
When I was in school, we would do the pledge, and then the teacher would say, let's have a moment of silence, and everybody would stand there. I had no clue what they were talking about. So I just said, I got to stand here and be quiet for a minute. I had no idea what that meant, when you're in third, fourth grade. So you just stand there and be quiet, But at the same time, I don't know if I want the school teachers I know offering a prayer anyway, because they might be praying it to the great Wiccan whatever.
Yeah,
they did that years ago. That was the only moment of silence that the teacher would have all day, so they got it in right there.
It's bedlam at school.
You in the class, Dave, right?
No, I was extremely quiet in school.
I'm kind of finding that hard to believe, but I'll go with that.
I'm actually a very quiet person.
Okay, if you say so.
No, I am, and the only time is in certain settings, but as a rule, I'm very quiet.
The only reason I mentioned that about the prayer, you realize that the men who you probably heard this story before, but the Constitutional Convention, they were making no progress. And I think it was Washington and Franklin said, let's start each session with prayer. They claim in their memoirs that after that, they made tremendous progress, wrote the Constitution that I guess is the best Constitution in the world at this point. And those men prayed all the time. I mean, you just read about Washington and Franklin. And I mean, they may have had different beliefs on denominations, and I think some of them were more critical of other denominations, but they still basically had a Judeo-Christian ethics, and they prayed. And they wouldn't believe that it's now illegal to pray. We can only have a moment of silence. And I think because we're left away from God, we're in more violence and division.
Well, absolutely, because you create a void. Something's got to fill that vacuum. You're either moving closer to God or not. I don't think the religious process, the conversion process, you can sit still. You're either getting closer to God every day, every month or whatever, or you're getting further away.
Let me ask you a question, Dave. Do you sense what I sense, that people are substituting for God nature worship?
Oh, absolutely. And things and position and fame and money. But this whole nature thing, excuse me, with the global warming and all of that, and the vegans, and I'm not saying a vegan diet is not a healthy diet. Apparently it's quite healthy. But when you start placing more value on, the squirrel, than on God and worshiping what he's, that's not new either. That was mentioned several times in the Bible. Mm-hmm. But when you place more value on the things created than the creator, that's a little bit lost. And next thing you know, you run inside the YouTube channel and shoot people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
They're leaving out the fact that she came from a Muslim country, and all the other craziness that was wrapped around that female. That's not making any news at all, because it's not
Nope.
the guy. It's not the guy spitting tobacco with a shotgun rack in his truck, in his pickup. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're leaving out the whole fact that she was a left-wing moonbat. I mean, she was out there.
Yeah, and a Muslim, and she did not use the AR-15. She used a pistol. By the way, semi-automatic pistol puts out just as much deadly fire as the AR-15. They're both semi-automatic, but they have the world convinced that that is a military assault weapon, and it isn't.
No, it's not. And they make a couple of pistols now that will do everything the AR-15 will do, and it's a normal size handgun. It holds 31 rounds, and
actually, and some of these pistols actually shoot bigger bullets than the AR-15. So theoretically, they could do more damage.
Almost every pistol shoots a bigger round than an AR-15.
Yeah,
it's a 22.
So they could do more damage actually, but facts don't get in the way of political movements, and they want to disarm us.
Have you seen the video where Ted Nugent takes the AR-15 and he shoots a paper target and there's a little round hole in it, and then he takes his goose gun and blows a hole in it like that?
I haven't seen
that. Because you're yelling about, not yelling about the gun that I shoot pheasant with, you know. They're yelling about a thing that makes a pea hole size. Just
it bothers me that the media downplays stories that don't fit into the narrative they want, overplay stories that do. But I guess a lying media is what we've been predicting. Let's go to our next slide. Have we done the one showing the violence in the northern ten? Just one of many.
The next one is 2 Kings 10:6. All right. Then he wrote a letter to the second time to them, saying, If ye be mine, and if ye will hearken unto my voice, take ye the heads of the men your master's sons, and come to me to Jezebel by tomorrow this time. Now the king's sons, being 70 persons, were with the great men of the city, which brought them up. And it came to pass, when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons and slew 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets, and sent them to Jezreel.
But this is only one of the bloody revolutions. There are others. I just put that one scripture in to show how bloody the northern ten became compared to the southern kingdom, because they messed with God's religion and got further away from God. If we use an American example, we were talking about that in church today. I don't. You all probably unaware of this, but in Christian radio, they were discussing this meeting in Oklahoma, where they want to discuss a particular issue of people, of Christianity helping people get out of a bad lifestyle. Well, there are all kinds of protesters and threats. What is interesting is 10 years ago, they said, well, you can talk about anything you want inside your churches, just don't bring it to the public square. Well, now they're demanding to control what's taught in churches if it's something politically incorrect. I thought, boy, have we made a jump down. And Oklahoma City is practically the buckle of the Bible Belt.
You know why? Because this anti-God, anti-Christ is a drug. They do a little bit, they get addicted, and a little doesn't do it anymore, and they have to do more, and they have to do more, and they have to do more. And no matter what you give them, it's never enough. It's never enough. It isn't enough to just bake a cake. You have to come and serve that cake. You have to be part of this event. It's never enough. And they won't stop until they have everything.
That's, they're not going to leave churches to teach things they don't agree with, apparently. And we don't know what will happen in that church. I guess it's this weekend in Oklahoma. We'll find out. But I thought, boy, this is demonstrators and threats. It's interesting. That's the disunity in this country. Let's go to the next slide.
All right, and helps if I bring it up. 1 week and I forget everything. You see that? All right. 1 Kings 16:31, and it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethabel, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria.
And by the way, the Bible talks about this. This is Ahab is considered now he and Jezebel. She was a high priestess of Baal worship, or at least some branch of it, as the worst ever. Things have gone from bad to worse. And obviously bad things happened to them, to Jezebel. Things got really brutal. Dogs ate her body. I don't know, it scared anybody, but all I'm saying is things got very violent and brutal in the northern 10 the further they got away from God. And that is the fear that we see in America. People do not want to cooperate. They don't want to, you know. I'll tell another stupid joke, but this is probably true. If, let's say, at some press conference, the president walked on water. Next morning in the press, you see a story. The president is so backwards he can't swim.
Yeah. It's like the one where they claim that if you had a headline where the president has found a cure for cancer, thousands of doctors and nurses out of work, hospitals closing, things like that.
As funny as that sounds, it is almost that bad.
Oh, it is that bad.
They would look for, in that good news, they'd look for anything that's bad in the good news. We comb through this thing top to bottom, and that's all you would hear. That's making the country more divided and more hatred. That's the track that we're on.
I saw one the other day that said Trump's not going to seek re-election after his 8th year.
Well, we shall see.
Unlike somebody else that tried to get it changed so they can just keep going for president forever,
I heard that discussed about some other president. Did you hear that?
Yeah, it was the last one.
Yeah. Discussed. Yeah, FDR did it, and oh well.
I heard the same thing about Bill. I don't know. I think it's every time there's a president, they like to bring that up.
When you look at it, I'd say we've had 4 presidents in a row. Maybe George W. Bush, the least vilified, but all of them have been vilified in one way or another, so that respect for the presidency is going down. And that's bad for America. I'm not saying you have to agree with a particular politician, but respecting the office is good for the public. And you can see it going down, down, down. I think they started to lose respect for the Clintons because of the scandals. And then they came, I don't know, the Bush deranged syndrome. And then Obama had a whole bunch of problems. We'll get into that. But it's gotten worse and worse. And now it's worse than we ever would have thought.
Well, it's disrespect for the office, but it's disrespect for the families. The disrespect showed to Barbara, all the way back to Nancy Reagan and then Barbara Bush. And it's just gotten worse and worse. Barbara Bush seemed to be a lovely lady from what I could tell, but they talked about she was, her clothes. I mean, they had to find something on her, And I would not talk bad about Michelle Obama because, frankly, she looks like she could take me,
You can email him at Dave at.
They're in trouble now. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. This kind of jumps into a church-related one, but it's something to think about.
All right. For ye are yet carnal, for whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, are ye not carnal and walk as men? For while one saith, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are ye not carnal?
Now, the principle we can draw to that scripture is we know because the Corinthian church had tons of problems. In a way, it created two of the greatest epistles because they were an out of control church, had a lot of problems. But because they were so spiritually weak, I guess that's the right word for it. He says, I can't talk to you like mature Christians. But didn't that also explain why they had so much strife and division? And looking at the churches of God, I'm generalizing. Any generalization, of course, is just a generalization. But the fact that, I'll put it this way, if the people in worldwide had been spiritually so strong, the apostasy wouldn't have happened. And then among those who didn't go into the apostasy, the unbelievable schisms and schisms and schisms and schisms would have been a lot less. So I would say we were not as I'm talking about in the past. Hopefully we're getting there now. We were not as spiritual as we thought we were. What do you think, Ken?
I think that's an obvious statement. Had people been, I mean, even some of the people that are in our organization now stayed in for quite some time and then decide it hit them. They finally came around, but so many of them, you could tell it was, I don't know what you would call it, stony ground or the thorns. I mean, it got to be where, well, this is what we really wanted to do anyway. For a lot of them, it looks like. This is for me looking from the outside, because obviously I was not in the organization. Dave would have probably a lot better insight as to what he's seen during that period.
It's interesting that we even went here right now, because today at services we had a man that he doesn't attend with us very often, but has been in the church, I don't know, 50 years or something. And he was talking to me about a minister that we'd had years ago who has left the church, keeps Christmas. And I mean, apparently his father was a minister as well back in the church I grew up in. And they both are Sunday keepers and just threw it all out. I can't understand how that could be. Here's my thing is, it's kind of silly, but I'm born and raised in the church. For me, one day to suddenly change it and say, you know what, I'm gonna go and be a Sunday keeper or whatever, the other, a Baptist. With my luck, I'll die 4 months later, and I wouldn't really got a chance to be a good Baptist, but why would I take my entire life and get rid of it over something which is really foreign to me? But why would I take 50, almost 7 years now and just walk away from that? I mean, isn't that in vain? I don't understand how that can be. For me, I just don't understand how you can walk away from opening your Bible and having it talk to you the way it does for us, to going into something that is just not biblical, and that suddenly I don't understand that.
Show you how unspiritual some people were. I was told there were some. The moment certain people announced all the laws, clean and unclean laws, are gone, and you can do everything the world does, they immediately, the very day, went over to something like Red Lobster so they could they pounced on it. They were eager to pounce on it and pounce on Christmas. And I'm thinking, if you really love God, would you be so eager to pounce on? It's not just the lobster thing, it's the Christmas, and you were just so eager to jump back into the world.
There was a family who just tormented me and would go to the minister and just lie. And I'd tell him, I'd say, that's not true. They're lying to you. And the minister would get so upset with me. And they tormented me for years. And Facebook's an amazing thing. I looked them up the other day, and there they are with their Christmas tree today. and trying to get me taken out of the church. Now, looking back, I can see where that unclean spirit came from, because they were not really truly part of God's church. But they tormented me, and for me to look on Facebook and there they are with their Christmas tree, and I'm going, wow. After years of this family just really not liking me, I guess things all come out in the wash.
Yep. They maybe sensed that you were too dedicated and they weren't. I don't know. But by the way, the founding fathers said that any self-governing nation like America, it's small, originally at least small government, self-governing as much as you can, had to rely on a moral people. And we seem to be losing that one. Do we have that Thomas Jefferson quote?
Absolutely.
This is one that'll surprise most people.
The First Amendment has created a wall of separation between the church and the state, but the wall is one directional. It is to keep the government from running the church, but is not to keep Christian principles out of the government. Thomas Jefferson.
Now, they quote his letter as justification for the wall, but they don't quote the rest of the quote. They've got it totally backwards. The thing that bothers me, surely they can get this historical record. It's not like it can't be found. It's just they don't care for the truth. They take Jefferson's word and they take half the story, and we don't want to hear the rest of it. That's like lying to American people.
It's the same way they twist Christ's words and they twist the Bible to make it look like he's a socialist. Same principle. They take what they want, throw away the rest, and use what fits their purpose.
While America, like every other worldly countries, have problems, I still think, relatively speaking, America was blessed, and maybe to some extent England, Canada, and Australia as well, to a great extent, because we had biblical principles in the public square. And take someone like Dr. King. A lot of his speeches, they can't read the whole thing in public school because he quoted the Bible all over the place.
Yep.
Because he was a Protestant minister, and that he based a lot of his things on biblical principles. But other leaders, before him, the whole thing. When Lincoln made his famous statement about a kingdom divided cannot stand, I bet you a lot of people don't realize that was Bible, and everybody in his day knew exactly where it came from.
I like Dr. King's daughter, Alvita. She is sharp. She was on something. It's been a year or two ago. She said, "Don't lump my uncle's fight for civil rights into this gay community thing. The man was a Christian minister, and he did not believe in the gay argument that's being made today." And she said he would be very upset to hear him be associated with this, because he believed in a man and a woman in a normal Christian home. He didn't believe in this stuff. And of course, nobody wants to hear her say that. But it was good that she came out and she said, don't put that together with my uncle,
What is bothersome is they make a moral equivalence of skin color and race with behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a sick and wrong moral equivalence. It's just not the same thing. But I know that nobody wants to hear it, so you can say it all you want. Nobody wants to hear it. But to say, well, this is just like having separate bathrooms, for white and black. This is the very same thing of not letting transgenders use any bathroom they want. It sounds like the same thing, but it's not the same thing.
I've got, parents in my place, and I've got one that's uber liberal, and he's just so dumb. His daughter is 13, and she helps me teach, and she's a really smart young lady. And she said to me the other day, she said, "My daddy is a great daddy, but he is wrong on so many things. And when you prove him wrong, he'll double down on it." And I said, "Yeah," I said, "I love your dad, but he's wrong." She said, "I was in a bathroom that was designated for anybody And it hit me when I was in the stall that there could be a man in the stall next to me. And she said, that made me very uneasy. She said, I got out of there and I said, and who is it that votes for that would allow that? Which party? And she goes, I don't know. And I said, it's the Democratic Party that's voting on that side of that stuff as a rule. And her mother's a school teacher and quite liberal, and her father's quite liberal. And she looked at me kind of taken back. But I'm finding that she trusts me. I'm able to talk with her, and she's going, hey, I love my dad, but he's just totally wrong on this thing. And she's a very smart kid. So I try to influence the kids to use their head, because look at it for what it is. That old thing about the king's new clothes, that story, they don't tell that story anymore to the kids. But I do. I tell these kids the story. I go, look at it for what it is. That's a dog. That's a cat. I'm male. You're female, and they're most of my parents are behind me. It's just this one guy. But his kids are smart, so I can't fix him, but I can bring the kids along.
You want to put up the next slide? But I certainly agree with you, Dave.
Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. Benjamin Franklin.
That is such a wise statement. And Franklin said, after the Constitutional Convention, you have a republic if you can keep it. And by that he meant if the public stayed on its toes and was careful. But most revolutions, and Franklin was quite right, end up being a bloodbath, and they end up with a strong man or vast government dictatorial powers. French Revolution, Russian Revolution, the whole bunch. You can rattle off the revolutions. Castro's revolution. They got political prisons in Cuba, and he's president for life. And I guess his brother is now president for life. You get the general idea. Without people, virtuous people, our form of government won't work. And as we become less moral, more bad things are going to happen.
Yep, it's evident by our political state right now. I mean, think about it. The most American, the person who most fit what America used to be was a billionaire playboy who's had multiple, girlfriends, and you name, he's probably done just about everything, but he's the one that stands closest with actual principles that America believes in, at least from the past. And they could look at the rest of them.
Really let that sink in. And you think,
yeah, exactly.
He's the guy that most of us are going, yeah, I'm more like him.
If you do a comparison, because the other ones are mostly, they're crooked as the day is long. And not to say that he didn't do a lot of stuff, and maybe still does, but at least he believes in some of the basic things that most Americans do. That's evident by the all the red blotches on the map from the election night, and the rest of them claim to be virtuous, claim to be all this stuff, but they don't identify with people that are out there that go to work every day. Plus, we're tired of all the politicians that just go along to get along and don't fight. He was willing to fight. We didn't need that's the thing. Evangelical people they didn't vote for someone that is most like themselves. They voted for someone that would take the fight to the enemy.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Let's look at the next slide. This is the last comment we have. It's the founding president of America. And his comment, I think, is really interesting. Very surprising, too.
May the same wonder-working deity who long since delivered the Hebrews from their Egyptian oppressors and planted them in the Promised Land, whose providential agency has lately been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation still continue to water them with the dews of heaven and to make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is Jehovah. George Washington.
Isn't that kind of surprising that Washington wrote that? He said a lot of other things too. I guess you could say this about a lot of people. People probably underestimate Washington, and I'm not saying he's right about everything, and it all, but Washington saw America defeat the world's greatest superpower. Actually, in 2 wars. Well, maybe the second war was a stalemate, War of 1812, but still, it was for America. It was a victory, relatively speaking, and everybody looked at, like, if you looked at a map of the North American continent when he first took over the presidency, let me get my years wrong. I think that was 1791. But if I get the year wrong, you get the general idea. Get all my dates right. 1791. There was this 13 little colonies on the East Coast. A good deal of it was on the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains. Within a few decades, they had extended control all the way out to the Pacific Ocean and created, maybe they didn't realize it at the time because it took a while for the world to see the impact, the greatest economy in the history of the world. And that happened fairly quickly. Now, someone can say, well, that was just smart politicians and smart generals. No, I think Washington saw it. It was a blessing of God. He saw it and he knew it. We don't know that anymore.
Well, he fought in the war. He would know that we had no business winning that without help.
We had guys fighting with no shoes on, fighting the greatest army, the greatest navy the world had ever seen. Guys with no shoes on are winning this fight. Think about it, in the winter. And think about it, I mean, when they had the blizzard and the fog came in where they couldn't control their ships and they lost half their ships. I mean, this did not happen by accident. It was divine providence, and God knew it. I mean, and of course God knew it. George Washington knew it, and he gave respect. Washington, one time they asked him, because he would ride right out in front of the troops, in front of the men, and say, "You guys need to go that way, and you guys need to go that way." And they said, General, you're going to get shot. And he says, I can't get killed until we have a union. I can't get killed till we're independent. And he believed that God was not going to allow him to get killed until we were independent from Great Britain. So the Holy Spirit, I believe, guided him.
It's clear that God blessed the United States of America. God had a destiny. We think it goes back to the blessings of Joseph, but even if you argue that, it's hard to see America purely on luck. Luck is just too much. Just too much. And you go through those guys who left St. Louis in 1805, Lewis and Clark, to discover the Pacific, and them getting Napoleon to sell us Louisiana Purchase, and the whole Texas-Mexican thing. You could just see it clearly, and them getting Alaska for practically nothing, relatively speaking. Actually, they got Florida for practically nothing too, from the Spanish.
That's worked out.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Well, that's debatable.
Well, if you don't mind swamps and gators, right?
I think we're ready to sell them California back, actually, about right now.
Yeah, that's true. Give them California back. And we can say national unity will continue to crumble unless this country can become more moral and more respecting of God. Even if they don't understand all the deep parts of the Bible, just basic godliness. Do you think, let me ask you, Ken, do you think there's any chance we won't have a major revival, but could we have a semi-substantial revival in America, getting more godly? Is that possible?
I think when in the past I would have said yes, because in the past when Americans back were against the wall, it was like the way the women dressed when things were really good and things were everybody was happy and there wasn't anything to worry about. The skirts got shorter and the blouses got lower, and when things got tight, jobs got scarce, the skirts got longer and they covered themselves more. And the same thing with turning back to God, or at least getting closer. I don't know if that's the case anymore. When things got tough the last time the skirts stayed just as low and the blouses just as, or skirts stayed just as high and the blouses just as low. So I don't think we're built for that anymore. I think they've effectively desensitized the generation below us to any kind of religion or God.
We're almost in the position, at least the younger generation, maybe 40 and under, that Jeroboam put the northern 10 in.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking that way. I mean, there might be a small chance, a few, but it's not anything you're going to see as a great movement. If it is, it's going to be small. Like the individual that Dave mentioned, maybe sometimes when you have parents that are too far to the right or too far to the left, the kids kind of swing the other way because they see they don't like what they see. But is it enough to bring things back around? I doubt it very much. I think we're on the edge of a complete slide off and away from God, not the other way around.
By the way, in the Great Depression, the divorce rate went down, families worked closer together, and crime and deviancy went down. This is the Great Depression. The opposite of what you might expect. During the Roaring '20s, bad things went up. Does America have that in it? It doesn't seem like. What do you think, Dave?
Well, it's you pray a lot more when you have chronic pain than when the whole world's just giving you free stuff. So we all know there's a God, but we only need him when we're hurting. And so, I mean, look, when I blew out my back, I was a praying guy, let me tell you. And then I think I see that with people, when you're making lots of money and there's no consequences for your behavior because you can just pay for whatever and you just go and party and party and party. But then we little by little get away from it. So it seems like as the nation is blessed and we have more disposable income, further away from God we get.
It almost makes me think God's going to have to make this country suffer before we have any chance of going back to God. I wish that weren't true, but it does seem that way, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. That's why there is a period of time in Revelation where people do repent, but that might be a ways off, not an immediate place we're at in this country now.
Well, I think we've had a very good discussion, and we were thinking about next week, looking at Josiah. Tell them how popular our Josiah podcast has been. It's kind of amazing.
Well, maybe someone could explain it to me, because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, our old episode from about 2 years ago or more, let me look it up real quick. Josiah, just in the past few weeks, has gone from very little to high up on the list. Let me see if I can find it. Don't see, yeah, episode 134 for some reason. Now it could be something in the tags, of course, but it is being one of the most watched or most clicked on. It doesn't, people necessarily aren't staying around, but they're clicking on it and they must be searching for it. It's Josiah, the king who found the book of the law. Something either in the title or in one of the tags that I gave it. It's getting hits. I don't know why, but it's strange. And that's 2 years old, and it's getting more views, 120 views in the last 30 days.
And I think you said it had 15. I think you said it had 1,500 views total.
No, not all time.
Oh, it's not the all-time leader?
No. It's not all time. But it's just strange that this thing that's 2 years old is coming out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's getting a lot of interest. I don't know if there's something to do with someone named Josiah out in the world, because I don't keep up with the latest and greatest, all the popular culture stuff. But some reason it's overtaking, episodes that normally it would not do. So I just find that a little odd. So anyway, just something to think about, and maybe we will do more on it.
Well, we'll see what we can do, and if we can get the material, we'll look at Josiah again, and maybe all these people hitting on it. Maybe it's strange. Like we did one on the land Sabbath at the time, is when we first started. It was one of our most popular ones. You would think nobody would care about that unless you were into gardening, but it would, So sometimes you're surprised what people like.
It's different, and nobody talks about it. Maybe if we did some more, people like to hear. I mean, they know all the basics, the Sabbath, the food laws, and all that sort of information. Some of the things that are a little more basic. In fact, I had if I can find the recommendation, I got a recommendation from Tom last week, but I don't know where it is. I'll have to send it to you because I'll have to look it up.
Okay.
But he had a recommendation for a good program, so I'll send that to you, and see if that's something we might want to do. But it was a little more difficult subject. It was 2 verses that people mix up, or they use it for their own purposes, and I'm trying to remember what the 2 verses were. Anyway, I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But that's the kind of thing that I think people are looking for, a little more in-depth, maybe of a smaller topic, not the broad topic like some of the ones we do, but something that really helps them to, fend off some of the attacks that the world likes to send our way. Oh, and next week, by the way, is our 5th year anniversary. Believe it or not, we will have been on this YouTube and doing this program for 5 years next.
That's hard to believe, isn't it? And I'm so young too.
And we are over 28,000 views since we started.
Hey, that's good. Well, that's wonderful.
Over 28,000. So we appreciate that from everybody from our good loyal listeners or watchers down in Trinidad and Tobago to England and Australia, and send us topics. The more you send us, send us topics, the more likely you'll get to have us go through it and have Dr. Ricks research it and us go through it and try to get answers for everyone. So with that said, if that's it, I'd say everybody, thank you for watching. Again, I hope everyone had a wonderful Days of Unleavened Bread. It's now past, the sun has gone down here, so we could run out and get a donut if we were so inclined to, but we won't. So we'll see you here again next week on our 5th anniversary. Until then, good night, and I hope you all, like I said, have the next Sabbath that we have tonight, the regular weekly Sabbath, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Ken.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.